NBA tip-off is less than a week away, and I want to continue going over the biggest changes being implemented this season. If you haven't watched my first video on this topic, I suggest giving that a gander at some point. Doesn't really matter which order you watch them in, but in that video, I went over the new in-season tournament, some new in-game rule changes, and the new system by which all NBA teams will be selected. In this video, I'm going to go over the handful of new rules that have been created to combat load management. The first one I'll start off with is a bit of an extension on the last thing I talked about in the previous video, but I'll be honest, I think I just forgot about it, and that would be an official 65-game minimum eligibility for end-of-season awards as well as all NBA selections. This is a pretty significant change and feels like an unmistakable move by the league to draw a line in the sand on how much they want to see from their star players in the regular season. And that significance is observable. A handful of award winners over the past few decades would have been changed if these rules were to have already been in place. Now, availability and games played have always been a part of these conversations, so I don't think that'll change much, but gone are the days where a star player who played like 63 games would even be in consideration. Per the new rule, a player has to be on the floor for 20 minutes for the game to count, so it's going to be hard for someone to completely abuse this rule and only check in for like 30 seconds. But with that being said, I very much still expect to see a lot of star players, like the ones usually in consideration for these awards, get as close as they can to that 20 minutes just to maintain their eligibility. I already know that's going to annoy a lot of fans, and it'll seem like they're abusing the system, which I guess definitionally would be true, but I think what needs to be remembered is that players want to win championships more than anything else. They're going to do whatever they can to limit their load and be in the best possible shape for the playoffs. And when I say they, that includes the team's staff, because I think what gets lost in all of this is that the player isn't the only one making the decision. In fact, players are often in stark opposition to their team's decision to sit them out. And look, 20 minutes isn't a bad number, 65 games isn't a bad number either. It's just hard to create arbitrary lines where rules start and stop, but I think the NBA did a decent job with these parameters. So hopefully this discourages the excessive resting of players without pushing them beyond where they feel they can compete. While I do think this is a significant change, I don't think it'll dramatically alter who wins most awards, especially not on a year-to-year basis. I expect that maybe every couple of seasons, a player who is more on the fringe of an award will end up winning it because the frontrunner in the race gets disqualified, but again, nothing that'll change NBA history or anything like that. The other massive change is the NBA's new policies around resting stars. Basically, these new rules are the league telling teams that they can no longer rest more than one healthy star player per game. Under these policies, a star is defined as a player who has been an all-star or made an all-NBA team in any of the previous 3 seasons. Teams must also balance the one-game absences a star player takes between home games and away games alike, with there being a preference for those absences to happen during home games. Additionally, star players have to be available for games that are nationally televised, as well as all in-season tournament games. And if that wasn't enough to get more player participation, teams must also ensure that even when their healthy stars are resting, they must be present and visible to the fans. All of this is with the caveat, of course, that players aren't forced to play through legitimate injuries or personal reasons, so that distinction still lies with the team and their medical staffs, which I strongly believe is the correct decision. The league will likely just have a much more present role in investigating whether teams are acting accordingly and not just resting their stars because they can, or with the express intention of losing games. I think teams benching their stars outright for the sake of losing games towards the end of seasons is an extremely lame practice, so hopefully this discourages that specifically. This is about the only area I'll really champion for fans, because decent NBA tickets are outrageously expensive, so if you're fortunate enough to be able to get some, you shouldn't have to watch a glorified G League game. No offense. So these rules can definitely look a bit strict, especially in the context of a long, grueling 82-game season, but there are some exceptions. The league will allow pre-approved notices to exempt players from back-to-backs who are 35 years or older on opening night, have played 34,000 regular season minutes, or have played in 1,000 or more regular season and playoff games. Yes, that's an extremely high bar to even meet in the first place, but the NBA is protecting the elderly. Look at them go. A team can also provide the league written information on why a non-geriatric player shouldn't play a back-to-back as long as it's at least a week prior. There's also some very specific instances where a team can seek approval for a star player to be unavailable for the end of a back-to-back based on that player's prior or unusual injury history. And lastly, there are even more exceptions that can be granted, ones for personal reasons, roster management, end-of-season flexibility, and more. So this is a big one. These rules are pretty significant. In total, some 25 teams and 50 plus players will be affected by these changes. That's well over 10% of the league. And because of that partially, I felt that I wanted to have my thoughts on load management in their own video, where I could flesh out my thoughts instead of shortchanging a clearly complex issue. These new rules are some of the most direct attempts the NBA has taken towards combating load management, but I do like that they're focused on the more extreme end of the spectrum. The league is at least making a distinction between fully fit players that are resting and players who rightfully have a reason to not be playing, rather than making some sweeping new rule change that disproportionately affects players that are justifiably sitting out. Cause I do think this issue's become conflated and players are just generally being attributed with who to blame, when in reality, the vast majority of them are not misusing the system to avoid playing games. And I know I already addressed the fact that the players aren't really dictating whether or not they play, but a lot of people don't consider that and make the issue solely about them. Even so, because there isn't a lot of clarity about what goes on, when a player seems fine one game just to not be available for the next, people assume it's a conscious decision of theirs. But it's a complicated issue and the players should be given the benefit of the doubt. It's quite frankly insulting to assume an NBA player doesn't want to play or is being lazy and avoiding playing when it doesn't matter. And while I do think the public should be allowed to know the reasons why a player is out, I don't think they're entitled to every single detail, especially when the reasons are personal and may involve someone close to them. Way too many people are quick to forget that these athletes are people who deserve respect and space and privacy the same way we all do. And we're already pretty dehumanizing about the way we expect these players to bounce back from injuries, so the least we could do is trust the words of the ones who actually know what's going on. And that doesn't mean big media personalities like Stephen A. Smith, whose quote-unquote sources told him that Lonzo Ball was having a hard time even getting up from the sitting position, and Lonzo had to make a video basically just going, "Who are your sources, bro? Just ask me next time." Just for Stephen A. to completely move the goalpost because he basically refuses to be wrong about certain things, but that's neither here nor there. My very drawn out point to all of this is, there are whole teams of people whose entire job it is to assess whether players are fit to play on a game-to-game basis, and I think it would be entirely disingenuous of the fans and the media, who don't know jack about shit, to not defer to them until proven otherwise. I know it might come off as a bit hypocritical to say, no one knows what they're talking about when it comes to load management, just to then rattle off all the things I know about load management, but I'm definitely not saying any of what I did in an attempt to advocate for any specific changes. I simply think one party is being unfairly targeted as the perpetrators of this predicament, and we shouldn't be so impatient to come to a conclusion. Aside from that though, I appreciate the efforts being made by the league to combat the problem in a way that isn't throwing players completely under the bus and saying, "Suck it up, go play more product." And the NBA is very much not above doing that, so, there's something. I like that these changes feel significant enough that we'll definitely be able to tell the difference, but the league also didn't do anything super drastic off rip and create a series of very anti-player rules. I think this is ultimately the best way to approach any complex issue like load management. Make small adjustments, see if they improve the issue, and go from there. Don't suddenly overcorrect and make things worse. The fact of the matter is, it might be a while before we conclusively know all the reasons that contribute to load management. For one, I don't think enough people talk about how players today are hooping 365 days a year from the start of their youth careers. Middle school, high school, AAU, camps, college, the pros. It's a non-stop basketball pipeline from a very early age, and somehow we're shocked when these kids grow up and their cartilage is absolutely toast by their mid to late 20s. The game's also a lot different now. There's more spacing, and there's more possessions per game, which means players are going back and forth a lot more. I'm not trying to imply that either of these are the sole reason or anything like that, just examples of often overlooked factors that contribute to the wear and tear on these athletes. Well, that's about all I have to say on the matter then. I don't think I'll go out of my way to talk about load management again, at least until there's some considerable breakthrough in our understanding of the problem, or a new and better way to address it. But either way, I hope you enjoyed this video. I've got too many ideas and not enough time before the season starts, but oh well, I'll just keep them coming as the season goes on. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll be back soon, but until then, take care.